Before you continue watching this video, understand something important. What you are about to hear will quietly alter how you look at people. Not dramatically, not instantly, but slowly and permanently. Because once you begin to recognize the patterns described by Niccolò Machiavelli, you cannot return to the comfortable version of reality you believed before. You will begin noticing small things. A smile that appears slightly forced. A promise that feels more calculated than sincere. A compliment that seems to carry a hidden purpose. Most people move through life assuming the world operates on sincerity, honesty, and goodwill. But Machiavelli observed something different. He observed that human beings are rarely guided by ideals. They are guided by incentives. And incentives shape behavior far more than words ever will. More than 500 years ago, Machiavelli wrote a political analysis that shocked Europe. That book was The Prince. But it was never simply about politics. It was about human nature. And human nature has not changed very much since 1513. Kings may have disappeared. Empires may have risen and fallen. But the psychology of power, ambition, and self-interest remains remarkably consistent. The truth Machiavelli discovered is simple, but uncomfortable. People behave according to what benefits them, not according to what they promise, not according to what they claim to believe, but according to what serves their interests in a particular moment. And once you begin looking at the world through this lens, many confusing experiences suddenly make sense. Why friendships fade without explanation. Why loyalty disappears when circumstances change. Why admiration turns into rivalry. Why kindness is sometimes mistaken for weakness. These patterns are not rare exceptions. They are normal human behavior. And recognizing them is the first step toward understanding power. Let us begin with the first principle Machiavelli observed. Appearance matters more than reality. Most people believe truth determines how they are perceived. But Machiavelli noticed something fascinating. Perception often replaces truth entirely. If people believe something about you, that belief becomes reality in their minds, even when it is false. A leader who appears confident is often followed even when he is uncertain. A person who appears successful is respected even before their achievements are verified. And someone who appears weak is treated as weak, even if they possess hidden strength. This principle explains why image management has always been central to power. It is not enough to be capable. You must also appear capable. It is not enough to be trustworthy. You must appear trustworthy. Because most people do not analyze reality carefully. They respond to signals. Confidence, status, authority. These signals shape perception faster than facts ever could. Machiavelli warned rulers never to ignore this reality, because the crowd judges more by appearances than by truth. But this principle extends far beyond politics. It appears in everyday relationships. Consider how people introduce themselves. Few individuals present their full reality. Instead, they present a curated version. A version designed to create a certain impression. Confidence, success, stability, kindness, ambition. This presentation is not necessarily dishonest, but it is selective. Everyone reveals the parts of themselves that create advantage and conceals the parts that create vulnerability, which leads to the second observation Machiavelli made. Trust is often temporary. Human beings enjoy speaking about loyalty. We admire loyalty. We celebrate loyalty. We promise loyalty. But Machiavelli observed something different while studying political alliances. Alliances remained strong as long as they were useful. The moment they stopped being useful, they dissolved. This does not mean people are evil. It means people are adaptive. When circumstances change, their behavior changes. Imagine two individuals who support each other during success. They celebrate victories together. They cooperate. They trust each other. But then circumstances shift. Competition appears. Resources become limited. Ambition grows. Suddenly, the same relationship becomes unstable. Not because either person planned betrayal, but because incentives changed. Machiavelli believed this pattern was inevitable. Humans respond to opportunity, and opportunity sometimes conflicts with loyalty. Understanding this reality does not mean abandoning trust entirely. It means recognizing its limits. Trust exists within conditions, and wise individuals understand those conditions rather than ignoring them. The third principle Machiavelli described is even more unsettling. Power rarely announces itself. When people imagine power, they imagine visible authority. Kings, presidents, commanders, executives. But Machiavelli noticed that influence often operates quietly. Behind appearances, a person who controls information can shape decisions without appearing powerful. A person who controls perception can guide outcomes without issuing commands. A person who influences emotions can redirect entire groups without holding formal authority. This is why subtle influence often proves more effective than open control. Because people resist obvious domination, but they rarely resist influence they do not recognize. Throughout history, the most effective strategists understood this perfectly. They shaped perception first. Because once perception is shaped, behavior follows naturally. Another insight Machiavelli recorded concerns kindness. Kindness is often considered a virtue, and it can be. But Machiavelli warned that kindness without strength invites exploitation. If someone demonstrates generosity but never demonstrates boundaries, others may slowly begin to take advantage of that generosity. Not always intentionally, sometimes gradually. A favor becomes expectation. Patience becomes permission. Tolerance becomes weakness. Over time, the balance shifts. The person who once gave freely begins feeling used. But the pattern started earlier, when boundaries were never defined. This is why Machiavelli believed respect and kindness must coexist. Respect protects kindness from exploitation. Without respect, kindness becomes vulnerable. But with respect, kindness becomes powerful, because it is seen as choice rather than obligation. Another pattern Machiavelli recognized involves ambition. Ambition drives progress. It creates innovation. It fuels achievement. But ambition also creates rivalry. When two individuals pursue the same opportunity, cooperation can quickly transform into competition. And competition often reveals the true priorities of people involved. Someone who once supported your success may begin undermining it when your success threatens their own ambitions. This shift can feel surprising, but Machiavelli believed it was predictable, because ambition rarely disappears. It only changes direction. Understanding this allows you to interpret behavior more clearly. When someone supports you, consider the incentives behind that support. When someone criticizes you, consider the incentives behind that criticism. Human behavior becomes easier to understand when viewed through incentives rather than intentions. Another lesson Machiavelli emphasized concerns emotional control. People often believe passion demonstrates authenticity. But Machiavelli noticed something interesting about individuals who maintained influence. They rarely allowed emotions to dictate their decisions. Not because they lacked emotions, but because they understood that visible emotional reactions reveal vulnerability. Anger reveals pressure points. Desperation reveals dependence. Fear reveals leverage. A calm individual is difficult to manipulate because their responses remain unpredictable. Emotional discipline, therefore, becomes a form of protection. It prevents others from discovering the precise triggers that control you. And once people cannot easily predict your reactions, their ability to manipulate you decreases. Machiavelli also warned about the illusion of permanent relationships. Many people assume certain relationships will always remain stable. Friendships, partnerships, alliances. But Machiavelli saw relationships as dynamic rather than permanent. They evolve as circumstances evolve. The friend who supported you during one phase of life may drift away during another. The colleague who collaborated with you may eventually compete with you. The partner who once admired your ambition may later feel threatened by it. None of these changes are unusual. They reflect shifting priorities. Recognizing this reality encourages adaptability. Instead of assuming stability, wise individuals remain observant. They notice changes early. They respond carefully. And they avoid placing their entire security in any single relationship. Another powerful idea Machiavelli explored involves fear and respect. He famously asked whether it is better for a ruler to be loved or feared. His conclusion was controversial. He argued that while both are desirable, respect built on strength tends to last longer than affection built on comfort. Because affection can disappear quickly when circumstances change. But respect based on strength remains stable. This does not mean cruelty creates power. Cruelty often destroys legitimacy. But visible strength creates stability. When people recognize that certain boundaries cannot be crossed, they behave differently. Rules become clear. Expectations become predictable. And relationships remain balanced. Finally, Machiavelli emphasized the importance of self-awareness. Many individuals attempt to understand others while ignoring their own motivations. But understanding yourself is equally important. What incentives influence your decisions? What fears influence your behavior? What ambitions influence your relationships? The more clearly you understand these forces within yourself, the less easily they can be manipulated by others. Self-awareness becomes protection, because manipulation often succeeds only when people remain unaware of their own motivations. Now consider what happens once you begin noticing all these patterns together. You begin seeing presentation behind personality, incentives behind loyalty, ambition behind cooperation, emotion behind influence. At first, this awareness can feel unsettling, because it removes certain comforting illusions. But it also provides clarity, and clarity allows you to navigate relationships more intelligently. You become less surprised by sudden changes, less vulnerable to manipulation, less dependent on appearances. You begin evaluating people through patterns rather than promises, through behavior rather than words, through incentives rather than declarations. And this perspective transforms the way you interact with the world, not by making you cynical, but by making you realistic. Machiavelli's ideas survived centuries not because they were pleasant, but because they were accurate. Human nature continues to follow the same patterns he described 500 years ago, which means the lessons remain relevant today. Once you see these patterns, they appear everywhere. In politics, in business, in friendships, in romantic relationships, and even in your own behavior. That awareness is the real power Machiavelli left behind. Not manipulation, not cruelty, but understanding. Because the person who understands human nature clearly can navigate life far more effectively than the person who relies only on hope. And that is why Machiavelli's ideas remain so controversial. They do not flatter human nature. They reveal it. And once you understand it, the world never looks exactly the same again.